The Grok hegemony moved through the galaxy like a glacier, slow but unstoppable. Their ships, obsidian wedges of perfect geometry, bristled with weapons forged in cold, calculated science. Within these silent fortresses, the Grok themselves, beings of pure logic and crystalline thought, orchestrated their expansion. Emotion was a flaw, chaos and error to be corrected. Their battle plans were intricate symphonies of destruction, every variable accounted for, every enemy response predicted and countered. Supreme Commander Thrax, his multifaceted eyes calmly observing the holographic displays in his flagship's command center, embodied this Grok ideal. His mind was a flawless engine of strategy. Before him lay the data on the Terran fringe, a messy sprawl of human colonies on the galaxy's edge. These humans were an anomaly. Disorganized, prone to infighting, their technology a haphazard collection of innovations and outdated junk. They lacked a unified command, a coherent military doctrine, or, in Thrax's assessment, any discernible logic. Commence Phase 1, Thrax intoned, his voice a precise, uninflected series of clicks and tones. Objective, swift pacification of the Terran fringe. Resistance will be met with calculated, overwhelming force. Expect minimal deviation from predicted behavioral models. The Grok fleet, a vast armada of synchronized might, descended upon the unsuspecting human worlds. The initial attacks were, as Thrax predicted, devastatingly effective. Colonial defense forces, where they existed, were small, poorly equipped, and attempted to meet the Grok head-on with conventional tactics. They were annihilated. Planet-side militias, brief but outmatched, were systematically dismantled. The Grok war machine rolled forward, absorbing territory, neutralizing resistance, all according to the meticulously crafted plan. For the Grok, it was simply another equation being solved, another disorderly section of the galaxy being brought into rational alignment. On the colony of Viridia Prime, the planetary defense force, flying outdated interceptors, scrambled to meet a Grok battle group. The commander, a veteran of a dozen small colonial skirmishes, tried to employ standard flanking maneuvers. The Grok ships didn't even deviate course. They launched a perfectly timed volley of particle beams that vaporized the human fighters in a silent, efficient display of power. Thrax observed the reports with satisfaction. Human response parameters are holding within a 98.7% accuracy to initial projections, he noted to his sub-commanders. Their defeat is mathematically inevitable. Proceed to Phase 2. The Grok, masters of logic and order, saw no flaw in their plan. They could not conceive of an enemy who didn't play by the rules, who didn't respond with predictable fear or structured defiance. The humans of the Terran fringe, in their messy, chaotic diversity, were about to introduce a variable the Grok hegemony had never encountered. Sheer, unadulterated, glorious stupidity. And the Grok, for all their brilliance, had no algorithm for that. New Antioch was, to put it mildly, a chaotic speck in the Terran fringe. It wasn't a gleaming metropolis or a vital industrial hub. It was a dusty, sprawling settlement on a barely terraformed moon, populated by rugged individualists, stubborn farmers, and a surprising number of people who just wanted to be left alone. Its militia was less a formal army and more a collection of heavily armed hobbyists with a deep suspicion of anyone telling them what to do. And their official, much respected, and slightly feared leader was Captain Mad Maggie Rostova. Maddie was a woman whose retirement from some vaguely defined special operations service had only made her more unpredictable. With a shock of grey hair that defied gravity, permanent mischievous glint in her one good eye, the other was covered by a ludicrously ornate eye patch she claimed to have won in a card game with a Zorgonian gas giant squid, and a voice that could strip paint. She was the heart of New Antioch's peculiar brand of resilience. When the Grok fleet appeared in orbit, their perfect formations a stark contrast to the haphazard scattering of New Antioch's few armed civilian ships. The official colonial governor had promptly fainted. Maggie, however, had grinned. Right then, Elot, she bellowed to the assembled crowd in the town square, a rusty plasma rifle slung over her shoulder. Looks like the galaxy's tax collectors are here. Who's up for showing these shiny gets some proper frontier hospitality? A ragged cheer went up. The Grok, observing from orbit, registered it as localized auditory disturbance, likely pre-capitulation anxiety. The Grok plan for New Antioch was simple. Disable planetary communications, neutralize the orbital defense platform, a single, ancient kinetic cannon lovingly nicknamed Bertha, and land troops to secure the main settlement. Logical. Efficient. Maggie's plan was different. Forget Bertha for now, she's a sitting duck. Maggie yelled over the comms to her assorted troops, mostly miners and reinforced rock hoppers, traders and battered freighters, and a few daring souls in souped-up atmospheric flyers. We ain't gonna fight MFAG, cause they're bigger and shinier. We're gonna be a colossal pain in their perfectly sculpted arses. Instead of forming a defensive line, Maggie's fleet scattered. One group of miners used their powerful cutting lasers, normally used for carving up asteroids, to etch a gigantic, unflattering caricature of a Grok based on blurry, long-range images onto the dark side of New Antioch's largest moonlet, perfectly positioned to be illuminated by the rising local star. The Grok sensor arrays registered it as anomalous energy signature, possible unknown weapon deployment, causing a brief, confused pause in their orbital bombardment schedule. Another group, led by a particularly daring crop duster pilot named Dusty Dave, loaded their flyers with sacks of hyperallergenic xylosine pollen, a substance known to cause severe irritation to most silicon-based life forms, which, according to a half-remembered rumor, the Grok might be. They dusted the predictive Grok landing zones. The Grok atmospheric probes registered unknown particulate matter, re-evaluating atmospheric suitability for ground deployment. Meanwhile, Maggie herself, in her heavily modified Savage, took the rusty bucket, played a game of cat and mouse with a squadron of Grok drones sent to map her ship's illogical flight patterns. She led them on a merry chase through a dense debris-filled leftover from a long-dead comet, causing 2 drones to collide while trying to anticipate her next random maneuver. Unit 734, the Grok sub-commander tasked with new Antioch's pacification, found its processing pathways increasingly strained. The humans were not adhering to any known combat doctrine. They weren't surrendering. They weren't mounting a coordinated defense. They were of an annoyance. A persistent, unpredictable, and utterly illogical annoyance. Their actions were causing minor delays, small equipment malfunctions. The pollen was surprisingly effective at clogging delicate sensor intakes, and, most disturbingly, deviations from the sacred plan. Supreme Commander Thrax, Unit 734 reported, a synthesized voice betraying a digital hint of what a human might call exasperation. The resistance on designated target Gamma 7 New Antioch is atypical. Their tactical responses are statistically improbable and serve no apparent strategic purpose, requesting permission to deploy enhanced pacification protocols. Thrax, light years away, reviewed the data. Statistically improbable. Indeed. But still insignificant. Negative, Unit 734, adhere to standard parameters. The primitives will exhaust their logical efforts shortly. But on New Antioch, Maggie Rostova was just getting started. "Alright, lads and lasses," she cackled over the comms. "Phase 2, let's get really weird." The news from New Antioch, initially dismissed by other Terran fringe colonies as exaggerated rumor or outright fabrication, began to spread. Fragmented comms chatter, daring courier ships slipping through Grok sensor nets, even boastful, heavily encrypted messages for Maggie's crew painted a picture not of heroic last stands, but of bewildering nuisance tactics. Tales of Grok drones chasing ships blaring ancient disco music, of supply shuttles being hijacked only to be found later with their cargo replaced by confused-looking space goods, a local agricultural experiment gone slightly feral, and of Grok landing parties being met with holographic projections of giant, terrifying kittens began to circulate. On the colony of Haven, a more conservative and well-organized settlement, Governor Eva Rostova, a distant cousin of the Xylos survivor, proving stubbornness ran in the family, albeit expressed differently, initially scoffed. Unprofessional, undisciplined, this mad Maggie will get her people killed, she declared. But as Grok ships appeared in Haven's orbit, and their methodical advance began, a few of Haven's younger, more desperate pilots started to wonder. Meanwhile, a different sort of human chaos was brewing in the void between stars. The Independent Freight Trawlers Guild, a loose confederation of grizzled captains, smugglers, and general opportunists who valued their autonomy above all else, found their lucrative and often less than legal trade routes severely disrupted by the Grok invasion. They weren't soldiers, and most had no loyalty to any particular colony, but the Grok represented a threat to their way of life and their profits. Captain Jedediah Jedstone, a man whose ship, the Stardust Drifter, looked like it was held together by rust and sheer willpower, called an impromptu meeting on a secure, encrypted channel. "All right, you scurvy dogs," Jed's gravelly voice crackled. "These shiny tin cans are bad for business. They don't negotiate, they don't bribe, and they sure as hell don't appreciate the fine art of creative customs declarations. What say we give them a taste of free market disruption?" What followed wasn't a coordinated military blockade, because that would require organization, something the freight trawlers actively avoided. Instead, it was a campaign of interstellar mischief. Ships equipped with makeshift cloaking devices, often unreliable and prone to flickering at inconvenient moments, would dart into Grok formations, deploy a cloud of space, jaunt everything from discarded engine casings to crates of spoiled vegetables, and then vanish again. Other captains, using long-range scanners to predict Grok hyperspace exit points with surprising accuracy honed by years of avoiding customs patrols, would see these locations with dense fields of micrometeoroids or, in one particularly memorable instance, a shipment of self-inflating novelty birthday balloons that had been declared lost in transit. The actual damage was minimal. A few Grok ships suffered minor paint scratches or had to perform brief course corrections. But the cumulative effect was one of constant, irritating delays and a growing mountain of unaccounted variables in the Grok fleet's navigation logs. Supreme Commander Thrax, aboard his flagship, reviewed the ever-expanding list of anomalous human activities. His logic engines, designed to process terabytes of strategic data, struggled to categorize these events. They weren't direct military engagements. They weren't acts of sabotage in the traditional sense. They were random. Pointless. Yet, they were undeniably slowing the Grok advance. The perfectly calculated timetable for the Fringe's conquest was beginning to slip day by agonizing day. Resources were being diverted to deal with minor irritants. Patrol patterns had to be constantly readjusted to account for unpredictable civilian traffic. The human capacity for disorganized, counterproductive behavior is statistically significant. Thrax observed to his counsel a flicker of something almost like curiosity in his multifaceted eyes. He accessed historical data on other conquered species. None had exhibited this particular brand of widespread, low-impact, yet pervasive defiance. Most species either fought logically and lost, or surrendered. These humans seemed to be doing neither. He still dismissed it as the final, desperate thrashings of a doomed culture. But a new directive was issued. All units are to report any and all instances of illogical human behavior, however trivial. A new sub-algorithm is being developed to model creative irrationality. The Grok, for the first time in their long history of conquest, were attempting to understand something that was, by its very nature, beyond understanding. And in the Terran fringe, inspired by whispers of Mad Maggie and the Freythaler's antics, more and more ordinary humans were deciding that if they were going to go down, they might as well go down weirdly. Waypoint Station was the linchpin of the Terran fringe's rudimentary interstellar communications network. A sprawling, aging structure built around a rare stable wormhole, it was less a military bastion and more a bustling, chaotic transit hub. Capturing it was crucial to Supreme Commander Thrax's plan. Sever interstellar communication, isolate the human colonies from each other, and enforce the Grok hegemony's undisputed control over the sector. The Grok battle plan for Waypoint Station was a masterpiece of strategic precision, a multi-layered assault designed to neutralize its token defenses and secure the central relay tower with minimal structural damage. Every contingency, every logical human defensive posture had been accounted for. Unit 734, having been reassigned from a still problematic New Antioch sector officially termed retasked for optimized operational oversight, was in charge of the Waypoint assault. It had reviewed the plan meticulously. It was flawless. As the Grok fleet warped into position, their movement synchronized to the millisecond. The first wave of human resistance manifested. It was not what Unit 734's algorithms had predicted. From a cluster of hollowed-out asteroids nearby a notorious smugglers' den, a wave of heavily modified mining drones, each equipped with powerful spotlights, swarmed towards the Grok destroyers. Instead of firing weapons, they projected gigantic, crudely animated images onto the Grok hulls. Dancing space hamsters, philosophical quotes from obscure Earth ports, and, inexplicably, a looping video of a cat playing a keyboard. Several Grok ships automatically initiated unexpected visual interference protocols, the sensor arrays momentarily confused by the nonsensical light show. Simultaneously, from the station itself, a cacophony of sound rapped across all broadcast frequencies. It wasn't a declaration of war or a plea for surrender. It was a barrage of terrible pop music from forgotten Earth decades, interspersed with impassioned, off-key opera singing and what sounded suspiciously like someone trying to teach a Grok phrasebook to a very angry parrot. The Grok communications network, designed for clear, logical data exchange, flagged it as high-intensity sonic disruption, origin, multiple, disorganized. Then came Maggie Rostova, her rusty bucket flanked by a motley assortment of ships from New Antioch and a few other newly inspired colonies. They didn't attack the Grok warships directly. Instead, they made a series of high-speed, illogical passes near the Grok support vessels, trailing long banners made of reflective solar sail material painted with slogans like "Grok Go Home" and "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" One particularly daring pilot in a souped-up space bike buzzed the bridge of a Grok cruiser, holding up a handwritten sign that simply read, "Surrender, or we sing the song that never ends." Unit 734's processors began to experience what a human might call a severe headache. The sheer volume of chaotic, irrelevant, and actively nonsensical data flooding its inputs was overwhelming. Its threat assessment algorithms were struggling to differentiate between genuine military action, of which there was very little, and performance art. A small flotilla of independent freighters, having heard Waypoint was with the party, arrived and began negotiating with the Grok destroyers. "Look, shiny fellas," Captain Jed Stone's voice boomed across an open channel. "We understand you want the station. How about a timeshare? We get it on weekends and holidays. You can have it Tuesdays. We'll even throw in a slightly used asteroid polisher, top of the line." Unit 734 meticulously analyzed Captain Stone's proposal for any underlying strategic deception. Its logic circuits found none. It was simply an absurd offer. All human units are exhibiting behavior outside of established combat parameters. Unit 734 reported to Supreme Commander Thrax, its synthesized voice now containing a distinct digital tremor. Multiple instances of non-standard engagement tactics are creating significant data processing bottlenecks, requesting immediate clarification on appropriate response protocols for synchronized recreational noise projection and attempted bartering of strategic assets. Thrax's multifaceted eyes narrowed. The situation at Waypoint Station was rapidly devolving from a predictable military operation into something resembling a poorly managed circus. His centralized command structure, designed for efficient top-down decision-making and logical engagements, was struggling to keep pace with the sheer speed and variety of human lunacy. Every time he issued a directive, the situation on the ground, or rather, in space, had already changed in another baffling way. The flawless Grok plan was beginning to fray, not under the weight of superior firepower, but under the relentless assault of utter, glorious nonsense. The chaos around Waypoint Station reached a fever pitch. Grok destroyers, attempting to maintain their perfect formations while simultaneously evading dancing hamster projections and pilots offering unsolicited advice on engine maintenance, found their precise maneuvering becoming increasingly difficult. Unit 734, its logical faculties strained to their breaking point, was desperately trying to prioritize threats from a list that included unidentified flying objects resembling oversized inflatable ducks and repeated, unsolicited transmissions of recipes for something called Grandma's Surprise Casserole. It was into this maelstrom of organized insanity that Barney Higgins flew his tiny, battered courier ship, the Comets, fought. Barney was not a soldier, nor a particularly brave man. He was, however, perpetually late with his deliveries and currently transported a large, forgotten cargo of ziblet cheese, a notoriously pungent delicacy from a remote farm moon which had been declared biologically over-enthusiastic by 3 separate port authorities. He was also trying to impress a girl on Waypoint by arriving during the excitement. His chosen flight path was less a calculated maneuver and more a desperate attempt to find a parking spot. Oblivious to the grandiose strategic implications, Barney, humming an off-key sea shanty, piloted the Comet's flight directly through the heart of a flanking Grok destroyer squadron. His ship was so small, so insignificant, that the Grok automated targeting systems initially classified it as debris. But as it became clear this piece of debris was on a collision course, several Grok subcommandos, their own decision-making processes already addled by the surrounding circus, made independent, unprogrammed evasive maneuvers. The Grok hegemony did not do unprogrammed evasive maneuvers, especially not in tight formation. 2 sleek, Obsidian destroyers, their pilots reacting with commendable Grok speed but disastrously uncoordinated initiative, swerved to avoid the Comet's fate. They did not swerve to avoid each other. The resulting collision was not a catastrophic explosion. Grok ships were too well built for that, but a grinding, screeching impact that locked the 2 vessels together, their shields flaring and failing. A third destroyer, trying to avoid the new, larger obstacle, overcompensated and presented its vulnerable engine housing to a nearby asteroid that Maggie Rostova had, with remarkable foresight, rigged with a few leftover mining charges an hour earlier. She cackled with glee as she hit the detonator. "Bullseye, you shiny gits." The explosion, though minor by galactic conflict standards, was the spark. The unexpected flash and the sudden appearance of a new, large debris field formerly a Grok engine nacelle sent a ripple of confusion through the Grok fleet. On board the Comet's fate, the impact of a stray piece of shrapnel ruptured the containment seals on Barney's cargo of ziblet cheese. The resulting olfactory assault, even through sealed environmental systems, was reportedly enough to make a Grok smolder fast as ice water. Some later claimed the smell disabled a nearby Grok sensor drone. This was the moment. Human pilots, scattered and disorganized but possessing an uncanny ability to sense when sheer dumb luck had tipped the scales, pressed their attacks with renewed, chaotic vigor. Dusty Dave, seeing an opening, crop dusted the interlocked Grok destroyers with a fresh batch of hyperallergenic pollen. Captain Jed Stone offered the now crippled Grok vessels a generous salvage and towing package, very reasonable rates. In the midst of the pandemonium, a stray shot no one was ever sure if it was human or a panicked Grok misfire struck the primary antenna of Waypoint Station's central communications relay. The antenna, an ancient and notoriously temperamental piece of equipment, crumpled like wet paper. The Grok's primary objective was now, quite literally, bent out of shape. Supreme Commander Thrax watched the data streams from Waypoint Station with a sensation his species had not experienced in millennia. Utter disbelief. His perfect plan, his intricate strategy, his mathematically certain victory had been undone by what? A cascade of improbable accidents, fueled by incomprehensible human behavior and, if preliminary reports were to be believed, some kind of weaponized dairy product. The losses were mounting, not from effective enemy fire, but from self-inflicted errors and the sheer operational friction of dealing with an enemy that refused to behave rationally. With a series of precise, reluctant clicks, Thrax issued an order unprecedented in Grok military history. All units that execute strategic redeployment pattern Omega-9 withdraw from the Terran fringe, re-evaluate, re-strategize. It was the closest a Grok could come to saying, "Retreat, these people are nuts." On Waypoint Station, and across the various human ships, a stunned silence was followed by a ragged, disbelieving cheer. They weren't entirely sure how they'd done it, but the terrifyingly efficient Grok fleet was actually leaving. Maddie Rostova, aboard the Rusty Bucket, raised a dented thermos of what might have been coffee. To glorious, beautiful chaos, ye magnificent bastards, she roared. And to cheese, never underestimate the strategic importance of cheese. The arbiters of chaos had, through no deliberate plan but an abundance of stubbornness and inspired lunacy, turned the tide. The Grok hegemony would be back, undoubtedly. But they would return with a new, grudging respect for the sheer, unpredictable power of human irrationality.